I booked a lake house, stocked the fridge, and sent the group chat a full schedule for our annual family trip. When I arrived, the house was empty. 2 hours later, my sister posted a family weekend at a cabin I wasn't invited to. I said nothing. Then I decided to shut down everything. Locks, login, unlinked my credit card from their accounts, and transferred the family emergency fund into my name. They can contact each other for help. I, 35M, had been organizing our annual family lake house trip for 7 years straight. Every August, I'd book the same 3-bedroom house overlooking Pine Lake, coordinate schedules with my parents, my sister, her husband, and their 2 kids, and handle all the logistics. This year felt different somehow, but I couldn't put my finger on why. 3 weeks before the trip, I sent the usual group chat message with the booking confirmation, grocery list assignments, and a loose schedule of activities. Everyone responded with their typical enthusiasm. My sister even suggested we try that new barbecue place in town. Dad mentioned bringing his fishing gear. Mom asked about the weather forecast. Everything seemed normal. I spent the Thursday before our Friday arrival stocking the fridge with enough food for 8 people over 4 days. Steaks for Saturday's barbecue, ingredients for Mom's famous breakfast casserole, beer for the guys, wine for evening conversations on the deck. The total came to nearly $400, but I'd grown accustomed to fronting these expenses. They always evened out somehow, or at least that's what I told myself. Friday afternoon, I loaded my car with bags, the cooler of perishables, and drove the 2 hours to the lake. The house sat exactly as I remembered it: weathered cedar siding, wraparound porch, dock stretching into water that reflected the late afternoon sun. I unlocked the door with the code I'd memorized years ago and stepped into silence. The house felt hollow. No luggage in the entryway, no voices calling out greetings, no sounds of kids racing to claim bedrooms. I checked my phone. 3:15. We'd agreed on a 3 o'clock arrival time, but families with children often ran late. I started unloading groceries, organizing them in the kitchen, telling myself they'd show up any minute. 4 o'clock came and went. Then 5. I called my sister first. Straight to voicemail. Same with my parents. My brother-in-law's phone rang endlessly without an answer. The group chat showed my last message from 2 days ago asking about arrival times. No new responses. By 6 o'clock, I stood on the deck holding a beer, watching the sun sink lower over the water and admitting what my gut had known for hours. They weren't coming. Something else was happening, something I wasn't part of. The realization settled in my stomach like a stone. I decided to stay anyway. I'd paid for the house, bought the food, taken time off work. Maybe they'd had some emergency, some miscommunication. Maybe they'd show up Saturday morning with explanations and apologies. I grilled a single steak on the gas barbecue designed for feeding a crowd, ate it alone at the dining table set for 8, and went to bed early. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly. I made coffee and checked social media while eating cereal from a bowl that echoed in the quiet kitchen. That's when I saw it. My sister's Instagram story, posted 2 hours ago. A photo of a rustic cabin interior with the caption, "Family Weekend Getaway." Nothing beats quality time with the people who matter most. The location tag read, "Whispering Pines Cabin Retreat," a place I'd never heard of. I swiped to the next story. My nephew building a campfire while my dad supervised. Another swipe. My niece and mom collecting pine cones. My brother-in-law flipping pancakes on a camp stove. Everyone was there. Everyone except me. The betrayal hit like a physical blow. This wasn't a spontaneous decision or last-minute change of plans. Someone had booked a different place, organized a different trip, coordinated with everyone in the family except me. They'd let me book and pay for a house they never intended to visit. They'd let me shop and prepare and drive here alone while they gathered somewhere else. I sat in that empty lake house for an hour, processing the magnitude of what had happened. 7 years of organizing family trips, handling logistics, smoothing over conflicts, making sure everyone felt included. And this is how they repaid me. By excluding me entirely, while letting me foot the bill for a house none of them would see. But the betrayal went deeper than one weekend. As I thought about it, patterns emerged. How often I picked up restaurant tabs without anyone offering to split the cost. How I'd been the go-to for emergency loans that were never quite repaid. How my credit card was linked to various family subscriptions and services. How I managed the family emergency fund that Dad had set up years ago when his health scare made us all realize we needed a safety net. I'd become the family's unofficial bank, organizer, and safety net. And they just demonstrated exactly how much they valued me in that role. I was useful for my money and my planning skills, but not worth including in the actual experience. That's when something shifted inside me. A cold, calculated anger replaced the hurt and confusion. They wanted to treat me like an ATM instead of a family member? Fine. But ATMs require proper authorization to function. I packed my bags, loaded my car, and drove home Saturday afternoon. But instead of calling to confront them or demanding explanations, I said nothing. I posted no social media responses, sent no hurt messages to the group chat, made no phone calls. Silence was going to be my first move. Sunday, I began methodically reviewing every financial connection I had with my family. The lake house rental was in my name, paid with my credit card. The family emergency fund, originally seeded by Dad but managed by me for the past 3 years, sat in an account I controlled. My Netflix subscription serviced 4 different households. My Amazon Prime account had 6 family members ordering with free shipping. My Costco membership was shared with 2 households who used my card for their bulk purchases. Monday morning, I started making changes. First, I changed all the passwords. Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, Disney+, Spotify, every streaming service they'd grown accustomed to accessing through my accounts. I removed their profiles, deleted their viewing histories, reset everything to my personal use only. Next, I contacted my credit card company and requested new cards with different numbers for all accounts they'd had access to. The customer service representative seemed puzzled by my request to invalidate so many authorized users, but complied. Any recurring charges they'd set up would start declining immediately. Tuesday, I went to the bank. The family emergency fund contained nearly $15,000. Money saved over 3 years for potential crises like medical emergencies or job losses. Dad had asked me to manage it because I was good with finances and had a stable income. Technically, the account was in my name as trustee, but it had always been understood as family money. I transferred every cent to a new account with only my name. If they wanted access to family emergency funds, they could contact each other and figure out their own system. I was done being their financial backup plan while being excluded from their actual plans. The lockdown extended beyond money. I removed myself from the group chat without explanation, blocked my sister on social media, and stopped responding to texts from my parents. When my brother-in-law called Tuesday evening, I let it go to voicemail. His message was confused and slightly panicked. Apparently, his Netflix wasn't working, and he wondered if there was some technical issue. By Wednesday, the consequences were cascading. My sister tried calling after her Amazon order was declined. Mom texted asking why her Spotify stopped working. Dad called about accessing the emergency fund for some home repair issue. Each attempt to reach me went unanswered. Thursday brought increasingly frantic messages. They'd apparently figured out that these weren't random technical glitches. My sister left a voicemail that started angry, accusing me of being petty and childish, but ended with a note of worry. She asked if I was okay, if something had happened. The irony was rich. They were concerned about my well-being now that their convenience was affected. Where was that concern when they were planning a family trip behind my back? Update 1. Friday morning, my parents showed up at my apartment. I watched through the peephole as they knocked repeatedly, calling my name, trying to peer through windows. I sat on my couch, drinking coffee, listening to them discuss whether they should use their emergency key. The key I'd had made for them last year when I was traveling for work and needed someone to water my plants. They used it. Mom entered first, Dad behind her, both looking around my apartment like they were searching for evidence of crisis or breakdown. They found me sitting calmly at my kitchen table, reading the news on my tablet. Mom asked if I was all right, her voice carrying that particular tone mothers use when they're prepared to fix whatever's wrong. Dad wanted to know what was going on with the accounts and why I wasn't responding to calls. I told them I was fine and asked how their weekend at the cabin had been. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom's face went pale. Dad looked genuinely confused for a moment. Then understanding crept across his features. Mom started to explain, but I held up my hand. I told them I wasn't interested in explanations. I'd seen the social media posts, understood the situation perfectly, and made my own decisions in response. Mom tried to argue that it wasn't what I thought, that there had been a misunderstanding. Dad asked about the emergency fund, said he needed access for repairs after a storm damaged their roof. I explained that the emergency fund was no longer a family resource. If they had emergencies, they could handle them the same way they'd handled planning the cabin trip, by coordinating with each other and leaving me out of it. As for the accounts and subscriptions, I decided to simplify my financial life by removing the complexity of family sharing. Dad grew frustrated, saying I was being unreasonable, that families help each other. I agreed that families should help each other, and asked why that principle didn't apply when they were planning weekend getaways. Mom started crying, saying she hadn't meant to hurt me, but I was done accepting their tears and excuses. I told them they were welcome to contact each other for help with their streaming services, their Amazon orders, and their financial emergencies. They had managed to coordinate a family trip without me. Surely they could coordinate solutions to these problems as well. They left eventually, but not before Dad made it clear he thought I was acting out of proportion. He said one excluded weekend didn't justify cutting off the whole family. I didn't bother explaining that it wasn't one weekend. It was 7 years of being taken for granted, treated like a resource instead of a relative, and finally given clear evidence of exactly where I stood in their priorities. Update 2. Over the following days, the pressure increased. My sister sent long text messages alternating between apologies and accusations. She claimed the cabin trip had been her mother-in-law's idea, that they'd planned it quickly, that she'd assumed I wouldn't be interested because I'd seemed stressed lately. She insisted they hadn't meant to exclude me deliberately, but her explanations didn't address the fundamental issue. When planning a family trip, why wouldn't your first instinct be to include your brother? Why wouldn't you mention it in the group chat? Why wouldn't you at least cancel the lake house reservation I'd made and paid for? My brother-in-law tried a different approach. He showed up at my office Tuesday afternoon, waiting in the lobby until I finished work. He apologized sincerely, said my sister was devastated, claimed they'd all made a terrible mistake. He offered to reimburse me for the lake house costs and said they wanted to plan another trip with me included. I appreciated his directness, but explained that this wasn't about money or making up for one weekend. This was about recognizing patterns of behavior and making changes to protect my own well-being. They'd shown me how they viewed my role in the family, and I'd adjusted my involvement accordingly. He pressed harder, saying I was punishing the kids for adult mistakes, that my nephew and niece missed their uncle. That was a low blow, using the children as leverage. I told him the kids were welcome to maintain a relationship with me that didn't involve me subsidizing their parents' lifestyle or organizing events I might be excluded from. By Thursday, the financial pressure was becoming real for them. Mom called to say they couldn't afford to fix their storm-damaged roof without accessing the emergency fund. My sister's business had a cash flow problem, and she'd been planning to use her Amazon credit, linked to my account, to purchase supplies. Each crisis they presented as my responsibility to solve. But I learned something important that weekend at the lake house. Their problems weren't automatically my problems, and my resources weren't automatically their resources. Family relationships required mutual respect and consideration, things they'd failed to provide. Update 3. 3 weeks after the lake house incident, my sister made one final attempt at reconciliation. She came to my apartment on a Saturday morning, alone this time, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing the expression she'd used since childhood when trying to get out of trouble. She sat at my kitchen table and gave me the full story. Her husband's family had indeed planned the cabin trip, but only after she'd complained about how stressful our usual family gatherings had become. She'd apparently told her mother-in-law that I was controlling about trip planning, that I made everyone feel guilty about expenses, that I dominated family discussions. Her mother-in-law had suggested a small, intimate gathering at their family cabin as an alternative to my elaborate lake house trips. My sister had agreed, thinking it would be a nice break from what she described as my intensity around family events. She'd planned to tell me about the change, she claimed, but kept putting it off because she knew I'd be hurt. Then the weekend arrived, and she found herself going along with the original plan to let me book the lake house while they went elsewhere. She said she felt terrible the whole weekend, but didn't know how to fix it. I listened to her confession with growing clarity about our family dynamics. She'd viewed my organization and financial contribution not as helpful, but as controlling. She'd seen my investment in family gatherings not as caring, but as dominating. She'd rewritten our entire relationship history to justify excluding me. But more importantly, she'd chosen to handle her feelings by going behind my back rather than talking to me directly. She'd chosen to let me waste money and time rather than have an uncomfortable conversation. She'd chosen to prioritize her comfort over my dignity. I told her I understood her perspective now, and that it had actually been helpful for her to be honest. But understanding her motivations didn't change my decision to step back from the family dynamic we'd created. If she found my involvement stressful and controlling, she'd probably be happier managing family events herself from now on. She protested that wasn't what she wanted, that she'd made a mistake, that she'd learned from this experience. But I'd learned too. I'd learned that my family had been tolerating rather than appreciating my contributions. I'd learned that they viewed me as a resource to manage rather than a person to consider. Most importantly, I'd learned that I'd been enabling this dynamic by always stepping up, always paying, always organizing, always solving problems without requiring reciprocal consideration. The lake house weekend had been a gift, a clear demonstration of exactly where I stood. 6 months later, I'm still maintaining the boundaries I established that weekend. The family has learned to coordinate their own streaming services, handle their own financial emergencies, and plan their own gatherings. They've managed just fine without my involvement, which proved they'd never actually needed me as much as I'd thought. Mom still calls occasionally, usually when Dad's having health issues or when she's struggling with some expense. I listen sympathetically but don't offer to fix their problems. My sister has planned 2 family gatherings since then, smaller affairs that she apparently finds less stressful without my intensity. The emergency fund remains in my personal account. I've used some of it to take my own trips, solo adventures I'd never have considered when my time and money were always committed to family obligations. I've discovered I actually prefer traveling alone, making my own schedule, eating where I want, seeing what interests me. Sometimes I wonder if I overreacted, if I should have handled things differently, if I should try to rebuild the family relationships. But then I remember sitting alone in that lake house, realizing I'd been excluded from a family trip I'd organized and paid for, and I know I made the right choice. They showed me who I was to them that weekend. I simply started treating myself with the same respect I demanded from others. And if they can't understand why that was necessary, it only confirms that stepping back was the healthiest thing I could do. The family still exists, still gathers, still functions. They just do it without expecting me to fund and organize their experiences while potentially excluding me from them. That seems like a fair arrangement to everyone involved. And when I want family time now, I call friends who actually want my company rather than just my credit card number. Turns out there are people in the world who value my presence as much as my presence. I just had to stop giving all my energy to people who didn't fall into that category. The lake house is available for rent again next summer. I'm thinking of booking it for myself and a few friends who have earned the right to be included in my vacation planning. We'll split costs fairly, communicate openly, and make sure everyone who contributes to the experience gets to participate in it. That's how functional families are supposed to work. Mine will figure that out eventually, or they won't. Either way, it's no longer my responsibility to teach them.